So, okay. So, this is Nizar, co-founder of Sitecore User Group Chennai. Today, we have the session on practical Helix in action. It's a privilege to have Tibor doing the honors with the session today. He's a technical architect and a wonderful gentleman promoting Sitecore across different user groups.
Thank you.
Once again, on behalf of SUG Chennai, I invite Tibor for this webinar. Over to you, Tibor. Thanks a lot for joining. Please do the honors.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I just want to ask you before we start, can you hear me okay? And you can also see my screen probably, right? So we are good to start.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me start the session with a short introduction. So as Nizar already kindly introduced me and mentioned, my name is Tibor, and I'm working as a Sitecore architect and as a Sitecore developer as well from Central Europe, from Slovakia, Bratislava. So I have been involved in a couple of Sitecore implementations, and the inspiration for today's session was my involvement in the latest project, where we had the possibility of applying some Helix principles, basically creating the solution based on Helix. And there were a couple of, I think, interesting things which we did in this project when we were architecting the solution. And this presentation and this session will be about these bits and pieces which I found that should be good to share with the wider audience. So today's session is about Helix and practical Helix, and the agenda will be about basically I will be talking about some of the things you need to keep in mind when you are working with Helix. I will do a very short introduction to Helix, and then I will focus on some parts and some solutions which we needed to consider when building this Helix solution. So the high-level agenda and the topics for today will be, I will first talk about a bit about the advantages and disadvantages of Helix and some of the misconceptions I met during the implementation and during talking to other people. So I would like to just present my own view, how I'm seeing Helix and where it is beneficial and where it is, let's say, less beneficial. And then I will go to some practical parts and we'll focus on building a Helix solution. So I will start by telling you what you need to pay attention to while you are setting up the main structure and when you are trying to reuse some parts. Then I will talk a bit about Yeoman and how you can configure it and why this is very important. And then I will show you how to configure team development for Sitecore together with Glassmapper and T4 template generator. And at the end, I will talk a bit about abstractions, why abstractions are important, how we are working with abstractions in this project, and how we are leveraging the IOC container, the dependency injection, Glassmapper, and how these tools enable us to do effective unit testing. And I will talk a bit about how we achieved good code coverage on this project and what you need to take care about when you are unit testing your solution. And then at the end, I will just have a short recapitulation of the very basic and high-level steps what you need to do when you are building a solution within the Helix structure. I will just show you some practical examples. Okay, so let's start with a bit of theory. So when it comes to the advantages of Helix, I was talking to a lot of people, and some of them know Helix, some of them even apply Helix, some of them don't really know about this. But a lot of the times there is a misconception about Helix that being a modular architecture means that these modules can be freely taken from the solution and put into other solutions. So this is mainly the first and the biggest misconception I found when talking to people, and I just want to emphasize that Helix is not really a about modularity in a sense that you just grab a module from the structure and you put it somewhere and it will work, because there is a dependency chain in the Helix structure. So for those of you who maybe don't know what Helix is nothing more than just an approved way of building sidecar solutions, and a tested and suggested architecture and the collection of architecture principles by Sidecore that enables us to, let's say, speak a common language, so to have solutions that are all based on this Helix principles and the Helix structure, and to achieve better modularity of the solution, which helps us with the maintainability and managing the future development of these solutions. So why Helix was needed? I think Sidecore decided to summarize the Helix principles because they saw that a lot of Sidecore solutions are very different from each other. And then once developers moved from one solution to another, it was very hard for them to read the solution, to learn the solution. So they come up with a good set of principles that is common, and it is then very easy for you. If you learn Helix and you are on a Helix project, and then you are moving to a new one, it is very easy for you to pick up this project and to orientate yourself in it and to be effective while you are developing and maintaining the project. So on this slide, what you can see, the first graph is basically saying that this is usually what happens when you are developing Sidecore solutions. So you have some bunch of functionality and a lot of references which are uncontrolled. And you have usually some tight coupling and low cohesion, which means that a lot of the modules and a lot of the parts of the solution are referencing each other. Also, based on my experiences, what's really hard when you are developing Sidecore solutions is to maintain a consistent template structure. And again, where Helix helps you is that it prescribes a very good template structure based on inheritance and based on layers. And with the help of these layers, you can very nicely structure your templates, and then you will have order in the solution. Where it helps with maintainability. Once you need to put a new functionality into the Helix structure, you know you just need to identify which module it belongs to, and then you just create a template structure based on the already created order of the templates and the already created, let's say, consistency of the templates. And then you are good to develop. So the main advantage for me in Helix is that it's then really easy to maintain. So these are let's say the advantages I'm seeing when working with Helix. And on the right side, you can see some examples. So for instance, as you probably know, Helix has three main layers: the project, the feature, and the foundation layer. And this is just an example of how you can structure your templates and how Helix is prescribing it. So on the left side, you can see some feature modules. For instance, connector, entity, events, finance. These are business categories, and these contain the functionality and the business logic, as well as the templates, the interface templates. And then you have the project structure on the right side, and this project structure holds the templates that will be used for creating the content items. So you never, let's say, instantiate or create a content item from a feature or a foundation layer template. You are always creating them from the project layer, and those project layer templates then reference the foundation and the feature layer templates, which give them the necessary fields. So, just to summarize the advantages, it gives you a very nice structure. It's consistent across the Sidecore developers, so we speak the common language. The solution is maintainable and it's modular. This is the main purpose of doing Helix within the solutions. And another good example how important and how popular Helix is, I will just switch back a bit from the presentation and show you that currently when you are developing Sidecore solutions, you usually have three ways of going. The first way is to leverage Sidecore MVC. This is the good old tried approach where you are leveraging the model view controller pattern, and this is just an extension of the ASP.NET MVC model, which is a very robust web development model. This project, which I was working on and still working on, this is written inside for MVC. But you have different options and different modern options as well nowadays. One of these options is to use S6A. So this is the Cycle Experience Accelerator. And I don't really have time to go into the details, but what it gives you, it basically gives you some predefined structure, some predefined, say, components, modules, which you don't need to do from scratch. So this really is what it's in its name, that it accelerates your site code development and shortens the initial development time requiring to set up the solution. So this can really boost your site code development. And what I would like to point out is that, as you can see on this part, this is S6A and how S6A structures the items and the templates. And here you can see that they are actually structuring it based on Helix. So they have the feature, the foundation, and the project layer. So if you decide to do your development by S6A, you will still need to know the Helix principles in order to be effective and to know how to extend on S6A when you will be doing S6A development. So this is one thing, and the other very popular way of doing site code projects nowadays is using JSS. So JSS is site code JavaScript services. Again, there is not really a lot of time to go into the details, but this is basically the headless CMS option and headless CMS mode when the rendering of the components is not happening on the server side, but it is happening on the client side. So how this is working is that you are reaching out to the server for data, and then all the components assembled together is happening on the client side with the help of some JavaScript framework. This is not important for this session. This is a bit of an off-topic, but what I would like to emphasize here is that there were some topics on the Sitecore Symposium where some of the guys were emphasizing that you can also do Sitecore JavaScript services development with Helix in mind. Although this is like a front-end solution, but you can still apply Helix principles. So it's really important to know them. And Helix is very easy to learn. So basically, if you visit helixsitecore.net and you probably read through this documentation like twice, you will have all the details you need to start working with Helix. Of course, this is just the theory, but this very nicely summarizes all the principles, and it's really not a lot of them. So you can probably read it in a couple of hours, and you are good to go. But let's get back to the presentation. And what I would like to talk about next, after this short introduction and the importance of Helix, is my view on the disadvantages. Because there are some cases where Helix really introduces some complexity into the solution. As you saw previously, as I was showing you these modules, for instance, in this solution, you can see that we have 134 projects. So you can imagine when you are loading these projects via Visual Studio, it really takes a lot of time. Yeah, so especially when you are leveraging team development for Sitecore, this again adds a lot of modules because you need to create one project for the master database and one project for the core database for each and every module as well. So one of the disadvantages is that you will end up with a lot of projects in the solution, and it can take a significant amount of time for Visual Studio to load them. Especially if you are leveraging Git and you are switching the branches, it will take some time. So this is one of the disadvantages. The other disadvantage is that Helix is very purist, so it really enforces you to do things, but you will realize when you will be working with Helix, or probably you are already working with Helix, is that sometimes you need to be pragmatic and not really following all the principles, because that would either make no sense for your given solution, or it would just take a lot of time and then you would not have enough time to develop some features. So I'm really a pragmatic myself, and in some cases I found the need to actually violate and break the Helix principles. Yeah, so sometimes you need to do some hacks or some shortcuts, and this is, I think, totally fine. It just needs to be aligned with all the development team members, and then you are good to go. So again, what might be tricky is to make sure that all the developers understand Helix. This is another challenge. Just imagine that you have more than 100 projects in the solution, and let's say you have 20 developers. It is absolutely crucial and important that every developer is following the same development and architecture principles, because then what will happen is that one developer will break the Helix principle somewhere, and then this will have an impact on the whole solution. So we had some experiences with developers not really knowing Helix, and then there was a lot of problem that this caused. We needed to do a lot of refactoring, we needed to align a lot of references, and so on and so on. So when you are setting up and starting the Helix solution, I really recommend you to do some workshops together and understand whether all the developers are familiar with Helix, and whether you are on the same page when it comes to what kind of coding standards, what kind of principles you will be following, and where you are okay with, let's say, breaking the Helix principles. So I would like to just show you an example here on this slide. In the middle, you see that we have, for instance, a component or a rendering that's a promo box, and there is a data source template which is referencing the promo box template in the project layer. So what this tells us is that once you are creating a new item, based on which template the new item will be created, that will serve as the data source for this promo box. And this is an example how we are violating Helix, because in Helix, the feature level and the foundation level or layer should not reference the project layer. And here you can see that we are clearly referencing the project layer because we are reaching out to that template, which is inside the project layer. But the thing is, when I was investigating some possible solutions to this, there were some of them, but they had their disadvantages as well. So for instance, in Habitat, what they are doing, they are introducing some proxy items to avoid breaking the Helix principles. But with doing so, they are introducing a lot of new items into the solution and into the content, which is not serving any purpose of providing content to the site visitors. So this is, in my understanding, a hack to overcome and to enforce the Helix principles, but totally unnecessary. And for instance, by violating this, we are not seeing any disadvantages so far. So what my message to you is that when you are doing Helix, be pragmatic and do not follow every principle strictly, but try to understand what is important to follow and what is not important to follow. So also I talked about the misconception about modularity. I covered it already. So modularity serves the developers and the purpose of maintaining the solution. This is what Helix is about. And modularity is not aimed for the business and the easy reuse of modules. So you just cannot pick a module, especially if it's in the feature or the project layer, because that will have a dependency chain going to other different modules as well. So it's not like cherry-picking modules from the Helix solution and putting it into a different one. It's really about for the developers to know where to put things, how to maintain the solution, and how to get development right. Okay, so now we can talk a bit about some more practical stuff. Maybe I will just stop for a minute and let me ask you, is everything clear so far, or maybe if you have some questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I will just continue. Okay, so everything fine. Hopefully you can still hear me, right?
Yes, Tibor.
Oh, okay, okay, perfect. Yeah, okay. I was just scared that I'm just talking to myself, but if you can still hear me, that's okay. Good. So let me continue then, if no questions, and then we can have a discussion, of course, at the end of the session. So if you will have any questions, just note them, and I'm happy to answer you then either here on this session online, or then you can reach out to me offline as well. So we talked about the basic principles you need to follow and occasionally not follow when setting up a Helix solution. And now let's talk about reusing stuff. So you probably heard about Habitat. So Helix and Habitat, they usually come together, and Habitat is just an example implementation of Helix. So this is an example project you can base your solutions on. What I would not recommend, however, is to start your solution with taking Habitat and go one by one, because after some playing around with Habitat a bit and having a look at how Habitat is written, it's not the, let's say, best solution in the world. So it's very good. It's good for a first glance. It's good to understand Helix, but in some cases you would be better off starting your solution from scratch and not relying on just taking Habitat and then throwing away a lot of stuff. So what I recommend to you is to start with Habitat, understand Helix principles on a real example, take from Habitat what makes sense to you, and then create your solution, let's say, from scratch. So I would not recommend, cloning the repo and then building your solution on it, because probably you would need to customize a lot of things, and it will not be that useful for you. So if you look at Habitat, it comes in two flavors, by the way, and also regarding greenfield and brownfield approach. So greenfield is starting something from scratch, brownfield is starting something which already is being built or it already contains something. Yeah. So Habitat comes in two flavors. The original one was by Unicorn, and Unicorn is a different way of serializing Sitecore items to the file system. So Unicorn and TDS are the two basic ways. You probably are all familiar with it. This was the first one, and then later they introduced the TDS version, which is very similar. It just contains the TDS project as well. And now there is an important question here. Also, one more information for you. Sitecore is making Habitat obsolete. So I already heard some rumors that Habitat is getting obsolete, and they will come up with a new solution that will serve as a showcase to describe the Helix principles and to implement the Helix principles. But for some quick reference, you can still refer to Habitat. I would just like to recommend you to take it with a bit of reserve and not really try to copy it one-to-one. Sitecore will come up with something new, hopefully in the near future, so we will see. And this is the question I already started discussing. Is this a starter kit or a template solution? Yeah. And this is a bit of a mixed bag, because the thing is, what I found is that the Unicorn version describes itself as this. No, you should not clone this repository for the purposes of starting a new Sitecore project. Yeah, so this is how it starts. Habitat is intended as a reference example of a Helix-based Sitecore implementation. And then when you look at the TDS implementation, they have the installation options, and they say, yes, clone this repository to your local file system when you are starting a new project. So there's a bit of inconsistency there. Again, what I recommend to you is to have a look at this. You can also clone this repo, but once you are setting up your own solution, just take from it what you need. And what I really think makes sense to have a look in Habitat is how they are setting up the automation and the files that are needed for supporting the solution. So if you look at the right side of this slide, what you can see is that they have a section that's called configuration, and in this case we more or less base this structure on Habitat. Here you can see that we have a couple of guard files. So definitely what's important when you are setting up a Helix-based solution is to automate as many things as possible. And the tool you can use, and I recommend for you, is to use Gulp. So Gulp is based on Node.js, and you probably already know Gulp. You can install it via npm, so Node Package Manager, and this helps you to write some tasks which can automate some work for you. Simple as that. So you can write some tasks for deploying the solution, for building the solution, for doing some code analysis on the solution, for running some scripts on the solution. You can do anything with Gulp. So this was really useful for us to take some scripts from Habitat and then to customize it for our needs. Of course, you can also introduce a couple of custom sections which are not part of Habitat. And what we did in this solution is you can see on the top side that there is something that's called a bundle. And there are three TDS projects there: a feature bundle, a foundation, and the project bundle. Now, what is the purpose? You need to deploy your Sitecore items somehow. And the problem is that we have like 100 modules, so it means more than 100 TDS projects in this solution. You will need to set up all of these to generate a deployment package. So this is definitely not a good way to go. What we did instead is we are bundling all the content from these projects together into this feature, foundation, and project bundles. So this TDS project has possibility to reference other TDS projects, and this is a standard behavior of team development for Sitecore. This is coming out of the box. And once you build these projects, you can configure them to be built only in, let's say, release mode or in the deploy mode. It will grab all the content and generate you a Sitecore deploy package. And it will be an update package, which then later on you can deploy with any Sitecore tool. You can either deploy manually, but of course I recommend to automate this. The important thing is that these projects serve the purpose of generating the package with all the serialized Sitecore items from the solution, and then this package can be then deployed to the target Sitecore environment. So you can also use Sitecore Sheets or any other tool you see fit. This is one customization we did, and the other customization is you can see there is something that's called development content. And here we have something that's called a test site. So this is important as well, because what we are doing, and what I also recommend you to do on your projects, is to have a sample site serialized to the file system. Why this is important? Into this sample site, you can create something that is listing, for instance, all your components and all your page templates. So once this site is deployed somewhere, it's enough just to browse to that site, and then the site visitors will immediately see, this solution has this kind of templates, this kind of components. So this is, like a library of all the stuff that you are building. And this is also good because then the developers are encouraged to build these components and to try them out in Sitecore, to be able to serialize them to the file system, so you kind of enforce them to test what they built and to be in the shoes of the content editor as well. And then they will see, okay, can I build this component? Maybe not, maybe I'm missing some insert options, or maybe I forgot to configure some presentation details. So this is like a sample site, which I recommend serializing and then deploying somewhere. And there is another very important purpose. So nowadays, what we are recommending is to definitely do some automated functional testing. And you probably are already doing it, hopefully, on your projects via Selenium. So Selenium is a tool that can automate the browser behavior, let's say, or the browser manipulation, and it can provide you some automated functional tests. Now, what's the problem with Sitecore is that the content in Sitecore is changing. Yeah? So if you are creating Selenium tests, you need to have some stable content, because in Selenium, I'm not a Selenium expert myself, but my understanding is you need to select some elements from the DOM in order to manipulate those. And if the content is constantly changing, you are out of luck, because then the test will be always broken. And now, if you create this site, you will have an advantage that you have a stable structure of the site. So this site should be in read-only mode, and once you deploy it, they should not change it. And the advantage will be that you can then run the Selenium test, the automated functional test against this site. So this basically serves these two purposes. Enforcing, or maybe three, enforcing to developers to try their own components, providing a library of all the things that are built for the site in a structured way, and enabling automated functional testing. Okay, so this is some new, let's say, stuff we introduced in this solution, and so far it's working very fine for us. Okay, so let's go a step further. And I was already talking to you about the importance of enforcing consistency in the solution. Just imagine that you have 100 projects, and each of the developers are creating these projects differently. Okay? For instance, when it comes to managing NuGet packages, one project can reference different version of the NuGet package than the other one. You need to consolidate. You need to make sure that those projects are really consistent and referencing the same things. For instance, yeah, of course, when it comes to NuGet as well, but also when it comes to the structure. So for instance, if you are following the MVC pattern, you will have some controllers in the structure. You will have some services in the structure. You might have some, I don't know, view model renderings, whatever, different things that you are calling. And just imagine that one module has a completely different structure than the other one. And the developer tries to put something in that module, and he or she will be searching for the correct place to go. So, how to solve this? I'm not sure whether you are familiar with this tool. This is called Yeoman. And what it does, it creates the scaffolding for new projects. It can prescribe the settings, and it ensures consistency. And it is especially useful for Helix, because in Helix we need to make sure that those modules are as consistent as possible. And we found this really useful in our project. So it is really easy to customize. This is just a templating system, and it is written in JavaScript. So if you have some developers who can do JavaScript, who are good with JavaScript, it will be a breeze to set this up. And you can have a look at the generator that's written for Habitat. I provide the link here, and we are already using it on our project. So you can see on the left side of the presentation there are some commands. So if you would like to create a new feature module or a foundation module, you can do so by just running this command. And the structure is very simple. So you will have some generators. Node modules is just for making sure that Yeoman is working fine. And within the generators, you will have some templates. And in these templates, you can see on the right side that, for instance, I have Sitecore Feature Core SC Proj, and then Sitecore Feature CS Proj, and the same for master and tests. So this is where you provide the project which will be taken as a template. So once this generator creates a new project into the solution, it will take this file, and this file already has some structure, which is, for instance, in the code part or the test part. So these other folders are just supporting the structure, and you will get a completely consistent structure. So if you say to a developer, please create 5 new Helix modules, and you say to another one, please create 4 more, those modules will be created in a same consistent way. And this is really important, so that everyone can create projects and they will be completely consistent. So this is the purpose of this Yeoman generator. And as I said, I really like this tool because it really provided us with a consistent way of generating these projects. And then it just creates it on the file system, and all you need to do is you just go to the solution, you just right click, add existing projects, and you just include it into your solution, and you are good to go. Okay, so far we covered a lot of things regarding ensuring consistency and the initial setup. We talked a bit about what Helix is, some basics, and now we are getting to the advanced stuff. So here I will be talking a bit about GlassMapper and why GlassMapper is useful and what GlassMapper is about. So I'm not sure whether you are familiar with GlassMapper or any other ORM for Sitecore. Probably you might also know Synthesis, but GlassMapper, Synthesis, and other ORMs or object relational mapping systems more or less serve the same purpose. And the purpose is to create an abstraction layer between the database and your application to access the data in a consistent way and on a higher level. Because, you know, for instance, you might also know Hibernate or Entity Framework from the .NET framework if you have some .NET development experience. They are doing the same thing. They are exposing something in the code which you can access, and then that part which they are exposing, that logic does the heavy lifting for you. So you don't need to generate low-level, for instance, SQL commands when it comes to Entity Framework or Hibernate, but you just access data from, let's say, C#. You generate queries via link. You execute those queries via link queue. So it really abstracts away the complexity, and usually these modules are also maintained. So when there is a change needed, you just get it out of the box, and via NuGet or some additional other tool, you just grab it and you are good to go. So these relational mapping systems serve the purpose of mapping the data from the database to the system you are working with, and they provide an abstraction layer which makes sure that you don't need to deal with all the complexity and the low-level plumbing and the stuff. So GlassMapper is no exception. GlassMapper is a relational mapper for Sitecore, and I really like this tool because what it gives you, if you are already familiar with it, you already know it, but if you are not using GlassMapper on your Sitecore projects, what you are doing, you reach to the Sitecore API, you say, get me an item. You have the item, then you have the fields. The fields contain some raw value which you need to then map to the correct field types. For instance, you need to create a datetime field. You need to deal with a general link field. You need to deal with a rich text field, and so on and so on. So there is a lot of, let's say, complexity of just getting the data in a correct way. Of course, it's not easy. It's not hard code. It's not hard to write so. But it means a lot of repetition and a lot of unnecessary logic in your business logic. Because you need to grab those items again, you need to map those fields again, and it is just unnecessary work. And you can do that, and you can refactor that logic of grabbing the items and mapping the fields to your classes, or to your instances and properties, but it's unnecessary work because in GlassMapper you already have this. And I will talk about GlassMapper a bit more and how this is working and how this is mapping the data. There is not really time to go into the fine details, let's say, but I will just show you how to set it up in a Helix-driven solution in a very fast way. And then this will give you the advantage of not needing to care about all this stuff that I was describing to you. So grabbing the item, grabbing the fields, mapping the fields, and so on. This will come to you out of the box once you introduce GlassMapper in your solution. So you can grab GlassMapper from NuGet. So I think it's publicly available. And once you have it, what you need to do is to introduce the code generation with the help of TDS, if for instance you will be using or you are using TDS. Because what we need to do, just imagine that you have data in the Sitecore database. And now what we want to do is we want to have that data represented as our objects in C#. So for instance, you have a general link field or let's say a single line text, whatever. You need to have this data on a C# object as a property, and the type will be string, for instance. Or you have a datetime field in Sitecore. You would like to have it on a property, on an object, where the property type will be a datetime. So what you need to do, you need to generate these POCO objects, we call them, and these are just objects that will hold the data that will be mapped by the object relational mapper system. Okay, so these T4 templates are about. This will automatically generate these classes for us. Actually, these will be interfaces, but that's not important in this context. So what it gives us, after setting up this T4 template generation, you will automatically have those classes or interfaces in your solution based on the templates in the Sitecore database, and you don't even need to create those. So if I would need to hold some data for a datetime field, what should I do? I create some class, I create a property, and that property will be of type datetime, and I'm good. But that's not important work for me, because this doesn't give me any business logic, any business value. So by configuring this, it will automatically generate it for you. And I will just quickly describe the configuration. You see some files there on the left side, like general extensions, header, item, helpers. These are T4 templates, and it's nothing more than just C# code. And this is automatically executed once you are mapping the Sitecore templates into TDS and serializing them to TDS. So all you need to do on the TDS project, you just set the header transform file, which is glass v3 header, for instance, and the base project transform file, which is glass v3 item, and you enable the code generation checkbox for a TDS project. And then what will happen, there will be automatically interfaces generated for you. So there will be a file in your models. For instance, we have a navigation module here. We have a navigation master TDS project where we set up the code generation. And once, for instance, I have a header root template in Sitecore. Once I serialize it into TDS, this interface will automatically be generated with this T4 template generation mechanism. So here you can see that I have a iHeader root interface, and I have a contact link, for instance, a contact and the logo link. And this is the proper type, so it already knows that it will be a link. The contact is a string, and the logo link is again a link. So I will have the container which will hold the data, which will be mapped from Sitecore later on. So it really boosts your development, and you don't need to care about generating these things. There are some also very advanced features which there is not really a room or time to go into those, but I will just mention some. So this interface generation also supports the interface inheritance in mind. So you can create, if you have one Sitecore template that inherits from another one, this will already be reflected here, and this interface will inherit from that interface as well. So you can do all kind of magic and advanced stuff when you are grabbing the Sitecore items. You can say, I would like to have some Sitecore items based on this interface type or another type or another type, and via this interface inheritance chain and hierarchy, it will work just fine. Okay. So with GlassMapper, you have actually two ways of mapping the data, because now we have the container which will hold us the data, but now you need to think about how to map it. And there are two ways to do so. There is attribute and there is the fluent mapping. So what you see here in this case, this is attribute mapping, because you see Sitecore field and then the name of the field there on top of the property itself. And these properties are decorated with these attributes, and this tells GlassMapper what is the field name, so that when it will map the data from Sitecore, it knows which field to look at and which field to grab the data from. Okay, and the fluent mapping would be that you would need to write some code where you would manually describe which property is mapping to which field in Sitecore. So these are two approaches, and there is a lot of debate which one is better. So I will just tell you some examples why I like this one and why the other one might be better. This one is good because it's fast. You don't need to do anything. It comes out of the box once you set up the T4 template generation, but it breaks the single responsibility principle. So if you are a purist, you might notice that these interfaces are used for holding the data and also for mapping the data. And this is breaking that principle. But the question is whether you care or not. Yeah? If you care, do the fluent mapping separately, and then you will have the data and you will have the configuration in a different responsibility, let's say. So you don't need to put everything together. It really depends what you prefer. These two ways are more or less equivalent when it comes to the result. I really like this approach because I'm not a purist in this sense. I'm more like a pragmatic, and I don't see a problem of having two responsibilities of this interface. So holding the data and also providing the attributes for the mapping logic in one place. I think this is totally fine, but it's up to you to decide. Okay, and I will show you some examples as well. Once you set up this ORM, or for instance, if you are using GlassMapper, how to grab the data from Sitecore. But there is another very important thing that needs to be covered, and these are abstractions and inversion of control and leveraging dependency injection in your solutions. So just to give you a short introduction, inversion of control means that in a sense of when you are dealing with C# solutions, you need to, it is an anti-pattern to create instances of classes yourself, because then you are tightly coupling the implementation of the class with its usage, and this is not a good way to do so. So that's why we have IOC containers, and you are probably working with them if you are doing Sitecore development. This is the proper way to go. And what IOC containers give you, they are automatically managing the creation of the proper objects and the injection of those objects as dependencies. So you are not dependent on the concrete object, but you are just dependent on the abstraction or the interface, and the IOC container takes care of injecting the correct instance to that abstraction. Why this is important? This helps with unit testing, because in unit testing, if you are doing mocking, then it is very easy to mock interfaces because they are completely abstract, and you don't need to bother in trying to overcome the limitation of not using abstractions and interfaces. So I would recommend in your Helix solutions to introduce an IOC container, and you have a lot of choices. You can use different IOC containers. There is, for instance, Castle Windsor, Simple Injector. In Sitecore, I think starting from 8-point-some version, there is already an inbuilt dependency injector or injection framework inside Sitecore as well, so you can also probably leverage that one. But what's important is to use it. And here you are seeing, for instance, some example how we are dealing with it. So, for instance, we have something that's called a navigation service. We are just saying by this register type that once I require an iNavigation service, provide me with an instance of navigation service. So you don't need to deal with creating new instances yourself. This will be the responsibility of IOC container. And I strongly recommend you to always have one in your solutions. Okay, this whole topic is a bit advanced, so I just wanted to kind of show you the details and emphasizing the importance. This can be a topic for a couple of hours, so I don't really want to bother you and go into the details because we don't have that much time. But let me show you something practical here. So we discussed Glass Mapper and grabbing the data from Sitecore, and we also discussed inversion of control and IOC containers and abstractions and mocking and unit testing. So here on this slide you can see some examples how you can leverage this. I cannot really show you the real solution because this is like a non-public reference and the client should be anonymous, so I just picked it to this slide. And have a look at the first section, data access via Glass. So if you need a data source item, all you need to do is to, in the controller itself, say this get data source item, because the controller will be inheriting from Glass controller, and then you provide the interface. For instance, in this case, you have iMedia video asset, and you remember this interface. This is the interface which will be holding the data. So what will happen here, everything will be done for you. Glass Mapper will get the data and it will map the fields to the properties of this interface. It will create you an instance on the fly, and the data source item will be populated with all the data that you need. And that's it. You don't have to write any logic of grabbing the data, making sure it's the correct field type, nothing. Everything comes out of the box with Glass Mapper. The same for the context item. So you just need to use get context item. The same for rendering parameters. You just provide the type which you need for rendering parameters. In this case, for instance, iPromo box, and the data is there. And the same for any other item. So if you need some settings item, for instance, you just provide the item ID and you have the settings. So it really shortens your code, and it really enables you to focus on the business logic instead of writing repetitive, cumbersome data access logic. That's the sole purpose of it. And now, what is good about Glass, and why I also talked about abstractions, is because of unit testing. So with MVC pattern, it's really easy to unit test if you are providing the correct abstractions. And here you can see that everything can be substituted. So as we are just providing the interfaces in the controller hierarchy, we can substitute everything. In this case, we are using, for instance, and substitute, and it's really easy to then do some unit testing here. What's also important is that Glass Mapper also provides an interface that is the iSitecore context, and this is all you need to grab data from Sitecore. And what's good about it is that the iSitecore context interface can also be easily mocked. So you have a mockable unit of work interface exposed to you. So via this Sitecore context, you can mock any data access, and you can also mock the data because everything is interface based. So you can mock an iHeader route, for instance, and then you can provide a contact link or a contact, and you can do your unit test very easily. So these are the basics, and this is just a very, very simple example how to develop it in the Helix structure. Once you have the modules, once you have these good practices of providing a good basic of unit testing, a good basic of creating modules in a consistent way via Yeoman or the tool of your choice, once you have consistent approach of developing, all you need to do, once you have a new functionality, for instance, you need to create a new component, you create a template, it will be easy to find in the Helix structure. You create a rendering, again, it's easy to find where to put it because it will be in that given feature. For instance, you sync it into TDS, and you're good to go. For instance, you need a header navigation, you just create a view model, you provide some service of retrieving the data. That service will encapsulate the glass mapper, which will give you easy data access, and the code is simple, maintainable, unit testable. So it will really boost your development experience and shorten the development time. And that's it. When it comes to the main points, I would consider important once you are architecting or setting up a Helix-driven project. More or less, these principles will also apply if you will be working with SXA or JFS. I don't have practical experience with those, but you should be okay. Because these are very, very common principles that you can apply to almost any solution. Okay? And I think we have a couple of more minutes. So what I would like to focus now, I would like to go through these links, and this is listing all the technologies which we are using on this project. And then there will also be some 10 more minutes. I would like to show you some tools which I find useful when doing sidecar development. Probably, maybe it will be nothing new for you, but I wanted to show you some examples which will boost your development experience and again shorten your development time as well. So please let me know how much time we have. Can we stay for like 10 more minutes? Are you okay?
Yes, Tibor.
Okay. So let me go through this part as well, and then there will be some room for questions, and then we can conclude. So these are some references which point to the technologies we are using. I talked about Helix, I talked about Habitat, I talked about team development for Sitecore. FakeDB, this is a tool you need if you need to unit test Sitecore and you need to mock the Sitecore database. So once you cannot use GlassMapper, for instance, in some cases you need to use the native Sitecore API. In that case, you would need FakeDB. This is an interesting tool that can help you with unit testing Sitecore without connecting to the real Sitecore database. Very, very interesting and useful tool. Then you have Nsubstitute, but you can use MockU, for instance. This is for unit testing and mocking. For instance, you can use NUnit or XUnit, again, for unit testing. There is auto-fixture as well. This is also regarding unit testing. This helps you to shorten the arrange phase of unit tests. Yes, TDS we mentioned. GlassMapper. GlassMapper, unfortunately, now is paid, but only the training part. So I think Glass is still free, but if you would like to grab some Glass training, you need to pay for it. But this is basically where you can find tutorials for Glass. As I'm mentioning, this is now a paid service. Then we are using Windsor. This is the IOC container. And one important thing as well that I forgot to mention, there is also FXCOP and StarCOP, but you might be also familiar with something that's called SonarCube. And these are static code analysis tools. Okay, so I will also Google for SonarCube. What this enables you is to make sure that you have really good code quality. FXCOP really focuses on analyzing the assemblies once you are building the solution, and it notifies you if there is something in your code that is not correct. StarCOP, very useful. It enables you to write code in a consistent way. So for instance, if one developer would leave 2 empty lines in the code, StarCOP would say warning that no, it should be only 1 empty line. So StarCOP is about the formatting your code for C#, and it ensures that every developer will write the code in a same, let's say, same style, and it will enforce the same formatting rules. And SonarQube is again a very advanced tool that will provide you even more suggestions. So it will also check like the code coverage of unit tests. It will note you the code smells, some bugs, vulnerabilities. So what I would like to emphasize here is that when you are building a Helix solution, consistency is everything. Make sure you have some good rules and you are enforcing those rules. And this is why you can use FXCOP, StarCOP, or SonarQube. These are great tools for enforcing the consistent code and for checking whether your code is robust and whether it doesn't contain any issues. And it will give you a warning which you can then correct, and you will have much higher quality of code. So I really recommend to use these tools. And that's pretty much it. We went through Helix. We discussed SXA using Helix. We discussed JavaScript services. Yeah, this is not that important. You probably know Sitecore Rocks, but now what I will be talking about is some tools that can boost your development. Sitecore Rocks is a known tool, so this I already knew that Sitecore Rocks is available for Visual Studio. What I didn't know is that now it's also available for Visual Studio Code. So those of you who don't know Sitecore Rocks, this provides some features of, let's say, some shortcuts where you can interact with your Sitecore database and create, for instance, data definition items, templates, components, renderings very fast from Visual Studio. So you don't need to reach out to your Sitecore instance. Very useful tool. Then you have some Chrome web extension, Sitecore icon search. This is a great tool of choosing the right icon, which is usually the biggest task when you are developing Sitecore. By the way, Sitecore Rocks is also good at this, because if you are trying to find a good icon and you are using Sitecore itself, it's really slow. You probably all know this. So either use this tool or this icon search for Chrome, and you will get your icon much faster. I really don't recommend using Sitecore content editor for that purpose. Then, of course, if you need to automate something, there is always the possibility of using Sitecore PowerShell extensions. This is a fantastic tool maintained by a good community of experts. And if there is some task you need to do, for instance, removing some item versions, moving items to a given workflow state, managing anything in Sitecore that should be automated, this is the tool I really recommend to have a look at, because by writing PowerShell scripts you can automate a lot of tasks and you don't need to manually do it one by one, item by item. So I really recommend this tool. Then there is also some Sitecore developer tool. This is a Chrome extension, and it also provides some quick links and quick shortcuts to functionality. And there is also something which I recently discovered by a colleague of mine who told about this tool, and this is coming from Hedgehog itself, and this is something that's called Author. So this is a tool that enhances the content editor experience. This is very interesting. I think it's something new. It is paid service, and it is part of the TDS family. So as I mentioned, from Hedgehog, and it really provides a really good interface for the content editor. So very nice feature-rich stuff. I would really recommend you check it out and maybe suggesting it to your customers. And again, my last recommendation is do not try to reinvent the wheel. Always have a look at the Sitecore marketplace, and you can find a lot of really useful modules. I already mentioned to you the Sitecore PowerShell extensions, and there is also a module I created which provides you some dynamic placeholder functionality. So I don't want to go into the details now of the importance of dynamic placeholders. Most of you probably are familiar with it. But what I just wanted to show you is that it's really easy to do so. Once you have access to the marketplace, you need to anonymize the part of functionality you would like to share with the community. For instance, in my case, I just needed to anonymize this functionality, making sure that there are no client references in the code base or in the files. And then you can create your own module and you can share it with the world. And this is really useful because then the others, don't need to do anything from scratch. They have access to these kind of modules. And yeah, it was quite easy to do it. So didn't take that much time to register this module on the marketplace itself. So always make sure if you are trying to do something, first check whether there is anyone who already did the work, and if not, sure, do it yourself, but try to reuse as much as possible from the publicly available channels, either some marketplaces, the NuGet, the Node Package Manager, or anything that is provided by the community and is available to you. And I think that's it from my side. It was a lot to cover, so hopefully you didn't get too bored. And hopefully this session will give you some good basics on what to focus and what to take care of, what to ensure once you are starting your Helix journey, once you are starting your solution with Helix in mind and based on Helix. If you will be in a position of an architect, or you will be in a position of a developer, knowing these basics and suggesting it, describing it, discussing it with your team will definitely come useful to you. So thanks a lot for keeping with me, and now I still have some time, so if you are still connected and you have some questions, feel free to ask me anything, either now or offline as well. I'm available, and thanks again for the session and the opportunity for me to host this and to present it to you.
Thanks, Tibor. Any questions, guys?
I guess it's in the chat.
Yes, there was a question from Rogan. Already you answered it. Great.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, we discussed it. So yeah. I wouldn't recommend it. I recommend taking some parts from it, but no, not anymore. Wait for Sitecore. They will come up with something new that will be something better than Habitat, and I think that it will be worth to have looking at it. Otherwise, no. Just take Habitat as a reference model and just take something from it, but do not base your solution one by one on it. Yeah, that's fine. Just to confirm, feature-to-feature reference is not recommended, right? No, it is not. What you can do in Helix, you can do foundation-to-foundation reference, because foundation layer is very abstract. So there should be no harm in foundation modules referencing each other. When it comes to feature layer, feature should always just reference foundation. It should not reference other feature layers, because then you are not maintaining your dependencies right, and that will be the dependency chain will not be smooth. So you will end up with something like this. You will have a lot of entangled dependencies. So yes, that's correct. It is not recommended. Try to avoid it. Foundation modules can reference each other. Feature modules can only reference foundation modules. And project modules can reference both feature and foundation modules. That's correct. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Okay, so I think no. All right. So Nizar is again here. On behalf of SUG Chennai, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Tibor for this wonderful session. Mainly, he talked about the advantage and the disadvantage of Helix and building Helix solution, developing within the Helix, and some more useful tools. It was very useful, I think. Once again, thank you, Tibor, for coming forward.
Yeah. Thank you too again for hosting me. I really enjoyed it, and I really hope that you will take something from it. As I mentioned, in the future, if you would need any discussion or any help, you would like to discuss some more topics regarding Helix, please feel free to reach out to me anytime, and we can discuss. I will be happy to help and communicate. Okay, so thanks again. It was great.
Sure, Tibor. Yeah, looking forward to have more sessions from you, mate.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, so and also thank you all folks for joining. I hope you have enjoyed this session. Looking forward to meet you again in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.